Hello, it's Peter Fujiwara here for episode 10 of the IPhoneography series. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about next steps in finding a story. Now, so far, you've learned some skills and knowledge around shooting, audio capture, and editing. As well, we've looked at different pieces of gear that can improve your filmmaking. But ultimately, we want to remember that filmmaking is about communicating a message and making a difference. Now, remember back to that Christmas story video that we did in the first episode? That's ultimately what we are trying to achieve. So in the next step, we are going to figure out what can you do next to get some practice with all these skills and knowledge that you've gained through the entire series. However, before we begin, I want to do a big shout out to Mr. Ryan Hicks and all his students in the Regina Catholic School District. It's because of you and because of Mr. Hicks making this request that this episode is being created. He's used the iPhoneography series to kickstart the filmmaking with all of you. So this is why the episode is here. So say thanks to Mr. Hicks. Anyway, we're going to continue with the next steps in finding that story. And there are basically three different kinds of next steps that I would recommend, and they're definitely in order. So the first one would be to do a narration of an existing story. So just like the script that I gave you, you could take an existing story and then shoot B-roll, that's what it's called, to put over top of that story. So you could capture the audio in a controlled environment, so you'll always have good audio, and then just go shoot the images that go along with that story. And so that's a great way to start. So that's called a dramatization of an existing story. The next is you might want to do a documentary. Now, a documentary is capturing a story told by someone else. So it could be someone's life, it could be something that they're passionate about, but you film them in a controlled environment, so no issues with capturing audio or setting up the image and things like that. And that is much better. And again, as they speak, you would put B-roll on top of those images. The third, which would be by far the most difficult, would be a narrative of some kind. A narrative is where you may be creating a script. You're going to definitely have to have a crew. You're going to have to design the shots that you take. All those different pieces have to come together to tell a very extensive story. And when you go to the movies, that's exactly what that is. These are stories that have been created, scripts that have been written, and shots that have been taken in sequence, and the most complicated by far. So those would be the steps that I would take. So to begin, let's start with the narration of an existing story and then putting B-roll. So I'm going to read a story which you've probably already heard before, and it's out of one of my favorite books, Chicken Soup for the Soul, book 1, and this one's called One at a Time, which I'm sure you've heard. It's the starfish story. So I'm going to read this. A friend of ours was walking down a deserted Mexican beach at sunset. As he walked along, he began to see another man in the distance. As he grew nearer, he noticed that the local native kept leaning down, picking something up and throwing it out into the water. Time and again, he kept hurling things into the ocean. Our friend approached even closer. He noticed that the man was picking up starfish that had been washed up on the beach, and one at a time, he was throwing them back into the water. Our friend was puzzled. He approached the man and said, "Good evening, friend. I was wondering what you're doing." "I'm throwing these starfish back into the ocean, you see. It's low tide now, and all of these starfish have been washed up onto the shore. If I don't throw them back into the sea, they'll die up here from lack of oxygen." "I understand," my friend replied, "but there must be thousands of starfish on the beach. You can't possibly get to all of them. There are simply too many. And don't you realize this is probably happening on hundreds of beaches all up and down the coast? Can't you see you can't possibly make a difference?" The local native smiled, bent down, and picked up yet another starfish. And as he threw it back into the sea, he replied, "Made a difference to that one." Now, as you can see, I put images up that related directly to that story. So I essentially created a film with an existing story that all I had to do was read and then put the images over top. And in this case, they were still images that I had captured off the internet from a man named, believe it was Leo Matsuda. I found all these drawings that he had done, and I just put them in order along with that story. And that's a great way to start your next step. Okay, now the next one is documentary. Now documentary, you have to find an interesting story. So in this case, this is a documentary that was created for a competition by some of my former high school students of another former high school student who basically moved in a different direction. The student that was the focus of the documentary, her name was Samantha Phillips, and when she graduated from high school, she went into journalism and got a journalism degree at York University and landed this incredible job at a marketing firm in downtown Toronto. And we would meet on a regular basis, and I would catch up and hear what she's been doing. And she would tell me about all these incredible things, flying to Europe and meeting all these different people, and how the president and CEO of the company was talking about how she might become a partner one day because she's got so much energy and has been such a benefit to the company. And she was really enjoying this life and the money that it brought and the things that she was getting. She was thinking of buying a condo, getting a new car, all these different things that go along with financial success in your career. And I would always teach, always, are you feeling that you're making a difference? Is what you're doing really meaningful to you? And we would always talk about this. So in this one particular instance, she came back to me and she was telling me all these wonderful stories, and I'd always end with, yep, and as long as this is meaningful to you. And she'd say, oh yeah, whatever. Anyway, I guess she went home after that meeting and she was really reflecting on that. Is this meaningful work to her? When she was younger, in high school, and we used to speak all the time, one of her passions was whales. I don't know why. She had whales painted on her walls and things like that. But she loved them. Anyway, she was scanning the internet, just sort of looking around, and she happened to spot this visual communications diploma, postgraduate diploma program. And she was like, oh, this looks really interesting. And then one of the options to do your paper on was a place called Cetacea Labs, which was a humpback whale habitat in northern British Columbia. Well, that just sort of sparked like, oh my God, that would be amazing in her. So she decided to apply. And she decided that if she was accepted into that program, that she would quit her job and shift gears, completely change gears. And so that's exactly what she did. And so I told this story to one of my other former students, Alana Duval, and she did this video on my other former student, Samantha Phillips. And it was a documentary that ultimately won an award. So I'm just going to show you a short clip of that now.
Being in the Great Barrier Reef Forest confirmed the connection I had to nature, and it confirmed my drive to protect it. I had always loved whales growing up, and my interest in whales drew me into being interested in nature in general. And every day, at the end of the day, I asked myself, am I happy? Am I doing good for this world? And it's really driven me towards a point where I am really proud of the path I'm on. I did stray for a couple years. I thought maybe I could take this traditional path, and I went into marketing for a while, and I realized something was missing. All of the values that I had been taught, I wasn't pursuing them as profoundly and deeply as I should be. I came across Fleming College, which had a link to a program called Environmental Communications. And I started looking through, and they were associated with all of my favorite National Geographic photographers. I was like, this was made for me. I couldn't imagine somebody else who was made for more.
So that's a documentary. That's finding a story. Anyway, the last one would be a narrative of some form or another. And a narrative could be anything. And don't get stuck on the idea that you have to have a script for a narrative. A narrative can be all images with very minimal audio in terms of, other than ambient sounds and Foley work. You can just have images that tell the story. So with that said, I want you to watch this short video that was done quite some time ago in, I believe it was 2008, by some of my former students. And you'll see that it's in standard definition. They've desaturated, which means it's gone to black and white. And it is no dialogue. All it is music. There isn't even Foley work, sound effects. So just watch this video, and this is something you may consider trying. And the beauty of that is that there is simply music in that. So that makes a big difference. So, a good activity that you may want to try is literally to duplicate the entire video, every single shot. So, if you take a look at all these different shots, look at the angle of this shot. The camera's like right on the bench. Person sits down, it's a wide shot. And the nice thing about this, too, it's a single scene. Really, it is. It's just one location, and you don't have to worry about it. And so you go along here, extreme close up of these things, a little shot there. And all these shots here, think about these shots here that are framed up like this. You could take all the shots that are in this framing at the same time, even though they're out of sequence, just so you have them because you know how you're going to edit. So in that pre-production planning, you'd put all the shots together that are in this position and then get all those ones done and then take all the rest. But think about how you could go about duplicating this entire sequence, every single shot. And some of these are very difficult, like these ones get your actors going, and this one where their eyes meet. Look at how close and how tight this shot is. Okay, those are the things that will allow you to practice and improve your filmmaking. Okay, so think about that. You may want to take this exact video and all you do is duplicate every single shot. And this is a great first step to practicing a narrative. So think about that as well. Obviously, the big one would be if you did have a full script and you had to have actors that had to speak and you had to capture audio in different circumstances, outdoors, indoors, all over the place. That is by far the most complicated, but also the most fun. Anyway, so think about that as well. So this brings us to the end of episode 10. Next steps in finding a story. Have you found something in this discussion of the 3 different directions that you can head? something that you might want to do? Is there a story that you might want to tell? Is there a family member that has a story that they would like to tell that you want to do a documentary on? Or is there a favorite reading that you just love that you know you could put images to make that nice narration? Think about what you can do on your next step. And feel free to comment on this YouTube video and let me know what your next step was and what you're thinking of doing. Anyway, thank you for watching, and hope to see you in potentially episode 11. Take care.